Today, we have a very, very special guest. She is an accomplished singer and composer. She has worked with the likes of Michael Jackson, Denise Williams, Quincy Jones, Stevie Wonder, Ray Charles, and was and is the ninth and final member of one of the most iconic female groups of all time, the Supremes.
Yes.
Susaye Greene.
The last.
The
The
last.
last Supreme.
The ninth wonder of the world.
Oh my. Well, I don't tend to think of myself in such big terms, but it's a pretty incredible list of ladies and to have been involved with.
An incredible
Yeah.
list of.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get into it. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, Susaye, for those who don't know, how did you get your start in music?
Oh my. I started with baby food commercials. My mother and father were entertainers. And they were some of the first black DJs in America out of Denver, Colorado. That's where they lived, and they had their show there. My mother also had a television show. But it was an interesting beginning. I always sang, I'm told, in the crib. I used to sing
You one of
myself
those babies
to
who
sleep.
cried on key?
I did. I used to sing myself to sleep, just hum. And I started writing songs when I was about 8, So it's always been in my blood. But we moved to Los Angeles and then to New York City. And that's where I really jumped in. I was about 12, I think, when I started doing commercials once again. I had a commercial agent, and if you think of wheat bread, white bread, rye bread, blah, 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 blah,
I was just
that
going to
kind
ask
of
you to
stuff.
sing a jingle.
Who do you think of? Who do you think of? Freihoffers. That's who. Imagine remembering that.
So if someone remembers a Freihofer commercial, then they
Yeah,
remember you.
we're in, right?
So you lived in these cultural epicenters,
Yes.
Los Angeles, New York City, and that's where you were able to sink your teeth in.
Absolutely.
What does a song that you wrote, what does a song for an 8-year-old Susaye sound like?
Oh, it was pretty simplistic, It's my love, it's my love, it's my only love. Now, who knows where I heard the melody?
Sure.
I might have heard it somewhere, but that's the first thing I can remember. But my sister, Jade, was the 6th child in America to be diagnosed with lupus erythematosus. And because of that, when she passed at 12, it changed my destiny path, let's put it that way, because I had been the middle child, and that made me be the oldest, and there was this responsibility and all of that, to push forward. And I was very, very shy. But my mother was my first coach and mentor, and she insisted. She'd say, stand and sing.
You're going to do it till you get it right.
Yeah. Well, see, she knew I had talent. She helped me to develop it. She was wonderful and fun. She had a master's degree in music. She was the youngest person to graduate from Prairie View University in Texas. And, she was just marvelous.
You said your sister was the 6th child in America.
Yes.
Do we call that lupus now for short?
Yes, absolutely.
So your sister was the 6th child in
In
America,
America.
to be
Imagine that.
diagnosed with lupus.
Sure. And it was extremely rare then. And it's the kind of thing where you need blood all the time. But because my mother was so outgoing and so popular, all of the entertainers would come through Denver to the 5 Points. She worked at the Rossonian Hotel, which was a black-owned hotel. And Ray Charles, Nat Cole, Dinah Washington was a dear friend of hers, and they had this TV show. So people would come, and they'd donate either money for blood transfusions. And, it was very helpful, but it was so rare, and there was no cure.
Adequate treatment for it
Exactly. And you hit it spot on,
My grandmother passed away in the 80s from lupus. So I know all too well exactly what it is that you're speaking of.
Yes.
During that time, is that where you met Ray Charles?
No.
Okay.
No, my mom did.
Oh, your mother did.
She would tell me, of course, I was grown by then. She says, when Ray would come through, everybody loved his music and that. She said, but it was kind of scary. You could walk down the hall on his own and, and all that, you know. But
She's like, he didn't need a cane or
no,
anything.
nothing, no seeing eye dog, nothing, none of that. He was very independent. He was absolutely a marvel. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
We can get into that.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
So, young Susaye,
Mhm.
you are being coached and mentored by your mother,
Yes.
who is among the first Black DJs in America.
That's right.
Also an accomplished pianist.
Absolutely fantastic. She was a classical pianist. That was her area. But she had a hit record called Honey, Honey, Honey in, oh my, I don't even remember, maybe 1948, something like that, But it was a blues song. She could play all kinds of things and sing on her own,
We could probably find that record
Oh,
today
no
somewhere.
doubt.
It's floating around somewhere.
Probably on Apple Music. I'm sure I helped them put a compilation together of all of her songs. And she was quite some girl.
How cool is that?
Oh, she was fabulous, She was bright and she was beautiful and she just had a way about her. She's very flashy on the piano. And
You learned a lot from her.
I sure did. She taught me not just the music part, but how to live, how to create a beautiful life around yourself and surround yourself with wonderful, beautiful, intelligent people and, and to go for it, to not be afraid to do anything, to try anything and, no limits.
Because
She
there
was
are no
very
limits.
much. That's right.
The sky's the limit, and that's
It
infinite.
sure is. It sure is. And I loved that,
Yes.
Of course, she was much bolder than I. I remember her calling me from Paris one time. She was teaching Alain Bongo, who was the son of the president of Gabon in West Africa. And they were in Paris. They had their own everything. They had all like you have people have gold doorknobs. They were real gold.
Real gold.
Yeah. And she said, "Oh," she says, "I'm just done in." She's a Southern girl. She says, "They're cooking snake meat." And they're in some fabulous hotel cooking snake meat. She says, "How do you cook a snake?" She was hilarious. She
I
really
don't think
was.
most of us know how to cook a snake.
I'm afraid not.
I know somebody does. I know people do it, but I don't really know.
Not
go
me.
about it.
Exactly.
So you, at a certain point in your growing up, you're becoming Susaye.
Sure.
You end up touring
Hmm.
with Ray Charles
Absolutely.
as a Raylette.
Yes. If I can back up just a little bit,
Sure.
though, there were always these tremendous things. I've never planned anything, but these things happened in my life. I was part of the choir. Carol Buchanan was our choir teacher, and he put me forward for a show that Harry Belafonte was doing. And I went and I auditioned. And when I got there, he was there, and he was just the most gorgeous person. And I was only maybe 14, but I knew
But
that.
you knew what you were looking at.
Oh, yes. He was terribly handsome. And I had broken my heel going up the stairs. And I had it in my hand, and he walked over. He said, "What happened?" And I explained. And, I was like, "Oh, oh my
Little
gosh."
14-year-old.
I know. But they were wonderful. And I did the Bell Telephone Hour, which was one of the big variety shows at that time. I did that twice. And there was a large group of us. But after we finished those things, he invited my mother and I to come to his office, and he wanted me to go on tour. Now, by that time, I was maybe 15, right? And my father wasn't having it. You are not going on the road with Harry Belafonte.
At 15 years old. And in
okay.
what year would this have been?
Oh, who knows, But let's see, I was only in high school, junior high,
Far too young as
So,
far as your father was
far
concerned.
too
yes.
young. And it was a tremendous opportunity, but, things come and things go. I did meet Anthony Quinn in his office, and he gave me a little fillip, he said, "She's quite a girl," and that boosted my confidence quite a bit. But I met Ray, and this, of course, is years and years later,
Sure.
because Dee Irwin, who wrote "Would You Like to Swing on a Star? Hey, hey, hey," which was a big hit for him. He was a great writer. He was working in the publishing part of Ray's company. And he was a friend of my mom's and dad's. And he invited us to come down. He said, Ray's looking for someone, for his band. And so I got my sheet music together and went down there. Oh, absolutely. That's kind of the key, I think, to my life. I've always been prepared. And that's what I would recommend to any young person who would decide to be in show business or any other business for that matter. Dig in and get ready,
Get ready, stay ready, so you never have to get ready. Stay ready.
Yeah.
And you were ready.
But I was, and I walked in there, and they gave him the music, and he sat down to the piano. He asked me what I wanted to sing. And I remember I sang My Funny Valentine, and I sang probably He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother,
That is such a great song, Susaye.
It became quite a tune for me when I was in the Supremes. Always get standing ovations for that song.
And you deserved them.
Well, thank you. But I sang that, and he said, well, we're going to work tonight, if that's okay, if you can handle it.
And because you were ready, you could handle it.
Sure. I mean, and it had a lot to do with memory. I was very quick to learn songs and the like. But
so there was 4 Raylettes. You were one of the 4.
Yes, but I always had, my deal was to always have a solo spot in the show, as well as making more money than everybody.
I hear that.
Which I like. Yeah. Well, my mother was a pretty good negotiator, But I do remember she said, "Well, Mr. Charles, we're going to enjoy going on the road with you." And he said, "I'm afraid that's not how it works, darling."
Oh, he was telling her she can't go.
She couldn't go. That wasn't what he wasn't hiring her. He was hiring me. And she was kind of upset about that.
So she didn't go.
No.
Now, Susaye, listen, we've all seen the movie Ray, where Jamie Foxx won the Oscar.
Absolutely.
I cannot let this moment pass.
Okay.
Because there's a scene in the movie.
I don't know what you mean, but let's hear it. Which one?
There's a scene in the movie when Ray first auditions the Raylettes.
Yes.
And Regina King, who's playing Marjorie Hendricks.
Yes.
He calls him the Raylettes, and she shakes his hands, and she says, "Does
something
that
her
mean
arm.
that we have to let Ray?" And she said,
Well, that's not what happened to me, but
that's why your mother wanted to be on the road.
Absolutely. He was quite a guy. He really was. I think people don't know the fun side of him. He was tremendous with jokes and pranks, and he folded his money in the way that he knew which he could differentiate between.
Because each bill was folded differently.
That's right. He knew which bill, and he was tight about his money. He did not play, In fact, if you were 1 second late for a rehearsal, and please forgive me, 1 second, he would charge you. He'd give you $50, charge you $50.
It was a fine.
Oh, yes, which was kind of shocking. But it taught you to be there.
Considering at the time, $50 would have been a lot of money.
Absolutely, But it was more about the lesson, because that's how he was, Brother Ray did not play. He didn't. He was a consummate musician and entertainer, and he expected so much from you. You could be on stage, and he'd say, "Okay, scat, Sister Sue."
And you had to pick it right up.
There you go.
Well, that's how the song, what's the song? What'd I say?
Yes, that's how that came about.
That's how that song came about. Just
that's right.
Impromptu, on the fly, and everybody just had to pick up and get with it.
There you
and
go.
It's one of the
It's
greatest
the big
masterpieces.
Boys.
It's for the big boys. Everybody can't do that.
That's true.
What did you take away from that time with Ray?
Oh, my. I stood backstage every time he went on, and I watched. That's the thing that you learn from the masters. I watched, and I would notice, he's singing those same songs, Georgia on My Mind, What I Say, that whole group of songs, and singing them every night, because we were on the road from, March the 1st until the end of December, every year. And that's
straight.
Absolutely. We'd come home every once in a while, but you were on the road, because that's what he loved.
There's no better on-the-job training than that.
That's right. And I watched and I learned that you dig in and you sing that song like it means something to you. And you don't ever sing a song that you don't love. Because what's the point? You know, you can't put your whole soul into it. And
Singing something means nothing to you.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's just fluff, you know? Of course, there's a lot of that in the world. But I just think it, you know, when you have a person who made their way, and, you know, we just lost Quincy, and they were best friends.
We did.
You know, they really were. They were the best of friends. When they were 15, they had both managed to wind up in Seattle together. And he taught Quincy how to produce and how to arrange music. And that kind of got on his nerves sometimes. You know, he said, because everybody calls Q, you know, says, Q arrange.
I taught him everything he knows.
That's right. And he was very straightforward. What you saw was what you got. He had no airs. He had no, you know.
It was true
was
authenticity.
Right. Absolutely.
And you can still see it. To this day, you could watch a performance of him, an interview of his. And I think that is why his music has stood the test of time.
Absolutely
For
agree.
that reason.
I absolutely agree. And you could go anywhere in the world, you know, and people, that even if there was a language barrier, it made no difference because they could feel that, you know. I remember going to Israel and France and, you know, all over. That was my first real experience traveling the globe. But I wouldn't give up that time for anything.
I mean, Susaye, you traveled the world with Ray Charles.
Yes. He was very kind to me. You know, I adored him. I did. I did. He was marvelous, you know. He had all of this experience of the world and of music.
And you were like a sponge, soaking it all in.
I was. And, you know, I was the youngest one of all of them. But I was there to learn. And I did. I was like a sponge. I ate it up, you know. And he knew he could depend on me. I knew everybody's part, always. I knew all of the choreography. And because he was not going to cuss me out on stage. You know, he would call people's names.
He cuss somebody else out, not me.
He said, "You're flat." I'm like, "Oh, not me.
Won't be me.
It won't be me."
He said, "I got 99 problems, but pitch ain't one."
Thank you. That's really good.
So you did that with Ray Charles for a few years.
Absolutely.
How did we go from Ray Charles to Stevie Wonder?
Whew. With great trepidation. But Steve is a different person entirely, even though he adored Ray. And he did a whole album, I think, dedicated to Ray. And he mentored him for many years. But they were as different as chalk and cheese. They were, you know. Steve is still late. Wherever he is, he's being late.
So he wasn't doing no finding for being late.
Oh, please. I learned that you called first to see, is he there? Has he made it to the studio? If he hasn't made it to the studio, I'm not going.
Because you'll be sitting there all night waiting on
for hours. And Steve would call you at 6 o'clock in the morning, say, "Come record." And you'd trundle up, you know, and go, because it was always exciting. The way I met him, I'm trying to think. Oh, of course, I called Motown. This is just, I told you the things that happened to Susaye, right? I called Motown, and his brother Calvin Hardaway answered the phone.
What made you call Motown, Susaye?
Jesus.
I'm going to call. God put it on your heart. Call Motown. You said, "Okay, I'm going to call Motown."
Exactly.
Where'd you find the number? Was it in the Yellow Pages?
Well, yeah. You know, I mean, I can't remember, other than I just decided that day I'm going to call. And I asked if I could speak to his office. His brother answered the phone and said, "Look, he's auditioning girls today. Can you come down?" I'm like, "Heck yeah." You know, imagine
Lightning
that.
struck.
It did. It really did. And I remember I can't remember the name of the hotel. It was on Sunset. But it was like a rock and roll hotel. You know, all the big rock stars stayed there. And, there was a ledge across the back of this hotel that was, maybe that distance, And people would go from room to room. They were all staying there, go from room to room and have lunch and rehearse and all this. I mean, it looked extremely dangerous, but, you'd stay close to the wall.
They were walking in open
They're
air.
walking, okay. And I went, and I can't even remember what. Oh, of course, I sang "You and I" for him. He asked me, what do you know of mine? And, I probably don't admit this very often, but I knew some of his material. But he wasn't like I wasn't obsessed with it. So it was all pretty new to learn. And you can know a song that you hear from the radio 50,000 times, and you kind of know at it, but you don't know the lyrics.
Right.
Or, you know what I mean?
Harmony, you don't have all that that down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I knew that one. I sang that for him. And that night was the Grammys. And he said, would you dare to come and sing that at the Grammys? I said, sure.
So you call Motown. Stevie Wonder's brother answers the phone.
Yeah.
And Motown is in Los Angeles now by this point.
That's right. That's right.
Stevie Wonder's brother answers the phone. Says, Stevie's auditioning girls. Come down.
That's right.
You come down. You audition. He says, the Grammys are tonight.
Yep.
Will you sing this song tonight at the Grammys?
His song.
His song.
Imagine that. And I sang it. And, I got a good standing ovation and whatnot. And he played for me. And, the rest it was on.
Susaye. The things that happened to Susaye.
That's my blessing. What can I say?
And from that point on, you were with Stevie
Wonder
Wonder.
Love.
Wonder
yes.
Love.
And once again, I always had a solo spot. And Wonder Love. Oh, my word, Wonder Love. I love them.
Yeah.
We are still all friends. Nate Watts, who was his bass player. Oh, just the best band. They could play anything. And we got so good. We rehearsed 6 days out of the week. And we got so tight. Michael Cimbello, who wrote, "She's a maniac, woo!" from Flashdance, was his main guitarist. His other guitarist was equally brilliant. Ben Bridges, Greg Fillinganes, who became Michael Jackson's band leader. Greg was the piano player. Okay, and Greg was 18 years old. And I'll never forget when he came in. We called him Captain Quasar, because he could hear a song once
and pick it up.
Play it. That's right. It was brilliant, a brilliant band.
You were
Raymond
inundated.
Pounds on the drums. Oh, just so many amazing musicians. Denise Williams, Shirley Brewer, and I were the core of the group. And there were other people who came and left, but we were the core, and that was Wonder Love. They could do anything, any kind of music. We got so good, we began opening for him. We would open, and then we went in the studio and recorded a lot of songs that are still in the can that he never let go, But it was one of the most exciting musical times of my life. We traveled all around America, all around the world, went to Asia, went everywhere, Europe. It was just fantastic.
What was one of your favorite songs you recorded with Stevie?
Oh, my. You made life's history. You brought some joy inside my tears. Ooh! It's just he and I.
Yeah?
Yeah. I was on Songs in the Key of Life. And 6 o'clock in the morning.
6 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah. And he was having girl trouble. That's Steve, he was having girl trouble. He's always in love. But, it makes for great songs.
Songs in the Key of Life is arguably one of the greatest albums ever created.
Ever. Yeah, no doubt.
You were inundated with musical geniuses everywhere you went.
That's my second most blessing. Musicians, some of the greatest musicians ever, always surrounded my life. And as I said, we're still all friends, Wonder Love, because, we wrote Free together.
For Denise Williams.
That's correct. It was her first million seller. And right now, is to show you. Right now on Netflix, there's a new film called Peace. Something Peace. I can't think of the first word. Rob Peace.
Yes.
Which is a true story, I'm told. And Free is featured in that film.
All these years
It
later.
happens. Yeah.
It was just synergy.
Mm-hmm. And all the time. I mean, there's been so many covers of that song. Lil' Kim, Ice Cube.
It's been sampled
Ooh,
1,000
sampling.
times. What do you think of sampling?
Well, hey,
You like it?
sampling's bought a whole bunch of shoes. Helped raise my baby. You know, what can I say?
So you're not mad at the sample?
How can I be mad? At the beginning, I must admit, I did not understand. They're just taking your music and writing to it.
Because it was a different type of musicianship than what you had been used to.
Absolutely was, you know. And that's quite something. Oh, but it's been miraculous. My ride, my musical ride. We wrote I Can't Help It while I was there in Wonderlove.
For Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson on Off the Wall.
Off the Wall album.
And I Can't Help It. What can I say?
One of the greatest albums ever released.
Ever. That changed popular music. Now, I Can't Help It was a song that was supposed to be on Songs in the Key of Life. But Renee Hardaway, who's Steve's sister, who's gone now, Renee said to Steve, you know, Michael is getting ready to record. You should give him that song. So I was there when he came down to the studio, to Wonderland Studios. And they sat and talked, and he played it, and he said, gotta have that. That song is the song that has been the most covered song in Michael Jackson's discography.
Really?
That's correct.
Can't help it.
Changed the force. If you think about it, Off the Wall was an adult album, and it changed Michael's career. It made popular music, and this is documented. It made popular music have more jazz flavor. It was just the adult Michael. And because of that, it made so many other things possible in the industry. It was the
bridge from the Jackson 5
Absolutely.
Michael to Michael Jackson, the solo superstar.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely.
So you wrote the song for this album. Now, it's written, it's already composed. When Quincy Jones now takes it on as the producer, did he change the song at all, or did they take it just as it was written?
Yes. I mean, the essence of the song is the same. But it was first recorded in a Brazilian kind of feel, you know, very rangy, just fabulous, a fabulous song. But that's the key. A song is a song is a song forever, you know. And I remember Steve had a remote studio that was attached to the building. And I was sitting in there listening to songs from Songs in the Key of Life, and there was no one in there with me. Steve had gone inside, and Michael came in the room. Now, it's so loud, you can't hear yourself think. You know, it's just going. It was really a think tank to hear, how does this song transcribe, how does it flow, all of that. And we sat there, Michael and I sat there for maybe 2 hours, never said a word. We kind of shied each other out.
You were both extremely shy.
Yeah. And he finally said, when the music stopped and he was getting ready to leave, he said, "Are you Miss Greene's daughter?" I said, "Yes." You know, my mom. Because she got both LaToya and Janet ready to record. Okay.
Your mother coached Janet Jackson and LaToya Jackson.
Yes, she did.
To prepare them to be recording artists.
She was something else, you know. She was in Hollywood. She was known in record companies. She got Cheryl Lynn ready to record. Cheryl Lynn was one of her students. And when she got the call from Columbia that they wanted to sign her, she had to, pump it up. And they came, and, the rest is history. There were many, many people. Remember Webster,
yes,
the little boy?
The TV show?
She taught him.
Emmanuel Lewis.
Exactly, He had a wonderful story.
Did you anticipate, or did you have any idea sitting in that recording studio that night with Michael Jackson that not only that album that it would be so pivotal, but that song would mark a turning point in
No.
popular music?
No, you don't have any idea about those things. You're just having fun. When you write, if you're lucky, if you're blessed, you're just having fun. And that was a song that, Steve writes like, love you. I mean, just he makes sounds and
It's an amalgamation of sounds, and then
absolutely. And then I would go away and I'd write with those sounds. I'd pick that out of the air. It's really, I believe that it's God guiding it. Especially these songs that become so huge. If you think about it, I Can't Help It was a song that was never a single.
no,
But
but one of the most popular songs on the album.
absolutely. And when he passed, people wrote me from all over the world about that song, about how it had affected their lives. This one, I wouldn't have graduated school if I didn't have that song to work by. Or we got married to that song, all of that, those kinds of things. And I didn't know the reach that it had until then, how much it had affected people. And there are songs all the time, the most covered. There are recordings all the time. There's a brand new one with an Italian group right now. It's online, it's on Instagram. I'll send it to you.
I think that when you said you were just having fun, I think that's the sign.
I think so too.
That's how we
Even
know.
though I don't know, I believe in collaboration. Collaboration, even now, and not just in music, but in all of the creative arts. It's the key to the future because it gives you a fresh outlook, a fresh perspective that you might not have thought of a word or a way, and you inspire each other. But Steve, there are very few people that I have written with who you have that kind of a rapport,
Where
I
you can
know.
pull something out of the air and you know.
There you go.
Yes.
You know where he's going with it.
You all call him Steve. The world knows him as Stevie
Steve
Wonder.
Lind, yes,
Steve
Steve
Lind.
Lind Morris. That's his name, is Steve Lind. But we all call him Steve.
Yes.
And but so different from Ray. Just his Ray was very rebellious as a person. And that's why I think when he lost his family and he was completely blind, but he wasn't, well, as his mother said, you're blind, you're not stupid, and he was extremely intelligent. And Steve is the same way in that sense, but he's not adventurous in that same way. Steve is almost never alone, which to me, that would drive me nuts, because
You like alone time?
I need,
I love people, but I also do need my own time
absolutely,
to recharge.
that space.
Yes.
You need that just to hear your thoughts and recharge and, create.
And then in 1976, something really, really interesting happens.
Well, oh yes.
Oh, yes.
My mother, once again, has been so much a part of this connective thread, but she was best friends with Bob Jones. Bob Jones was the head of Motown publicity of that whole department. And he called her. They were on the board, the executive board of the NAACP and for the Beverly Hills branch. He called her and he said that Motown is looking for another Supreme. And I think you should put Susaye forward. And I'm trying to think where I was. At the time, I had, and this is a song that a lot of people know, I had recorded Until It's Time for You to Go, which was New Birth's first million seller, okay? And they had been having trouble with the young lady, and Harvey Fuqua called me. He had his own company at that time, but he was producing the album, the album with the black eggs on the front of it. And that was New Birth's album. And he said, I want you to sing this song. It's perfect for you. And we went in and we recorded it. And then, I didn't realize that I wouldn't have anything else to do with it at the time. I was paid a fee, to do it.
But then that was that.
But then that was that. And then one day they came on American Bandstand, and there is the young lady lip syncing to my voice, So that kind of.
Milli Vanilli'd your voice.
She did. I will put it that way because I never quite got, why they came down so hard on them. I mean, you could see they were lip syncing the whole time, But people, I guess it disappointed people. But that's what was happening, and that made them, what can you say? That's life. And it was only, I think, maybe 15 years ago, something like that people began to realize
that was your voice.
Yeah, but that's show business.
It is show business. It still happens today.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
Martha Wash, had
Everybody
tremendous
dance
hits.
now.
There you go.
There's the Jennifer Lopez, the song I'm Real. The whole hook is Ashanti, and you can hear it.
Yes.
Even though
we weren't told, but
yeah.
people do those things. And whereas it may not be fair, it's
That's what happens.
destiny.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in destiny.
I guess it worked out, didn't it?
Sure, it did. But at that time period, this was the interim that happened between that and that. So Bob Jones called my mother, and it wasn't an audition. I never had to audition, but I went to Mary Wilson's house one evening, and we sat and talked. We sat on the floor, and she was a lovely lady. She was. We really clicked. We had a lot of fun. She loved a party. She loved a good laugh. Loved music and champagne and caviar. So because of that, when we would travel eventually, and this was how I became one of the Supremes. But when we would get into a town, you'd go into your fabulous hotel, first class, everything, and in the lobby, they knew we were coming. So there'd be champagne and caviar. Now, I don't drink. So I'm like, you guys can have the champagne, but I'll take the caviar. Yes.
So you joined this group in 1976.
Yes.
Still at that point, the only other group on the planet whose name was bigger than the Supremes would have been the Beatles.
Yes, that's true. 12 number ones.
12 number
in
ones.
a row. Think of that. Who does that?
In a period of 4 years.
Yes.
From 1964
and
to
they
1969.
Rivaled. That's right.
They rivaled.
They rivaled.
How did it feel stepping into that?
It was what I'd call dead odd.
Dead odd.
Dead odd. Because, Cindy Birdsong was leaving, and Cindy's just a tremendous lady, so sweet and kind-hearted, dearly loved. And it made it hard. I know I can always stand on my own. What can I say? I know what I can do on a stage. But the fans kind of felt it was a revolving door by that time.
Because so many members had come and gone by that point.
Exactly. But see, some strange things happened. Sherry was in the group for 3 years before Cindy left. And they didn't have a contract during those 3 years.
Right.
They had not re-signed them, even though they were recording and performing around the world and all that. And, Sherry is a dynamic performer.
Correct. Little lady with the big voice.
Absolutely, But here I come, and I was told, you'll be able to write. I had a hit song with Free, number one song in England, at that time.
You had been with Ray Charles. You'd been with Stevie Wonder.
Absolutely.
You'd been writing.
And I was told, because I met with Mary, we went out to eat, we had good fun, we clicked, and we knew we were going to do this. Let's do this. And then I met with the manager.
Her husband,
Pedro
Ferreira.
And Pedro said, look, he says, it's an awkward situation, but you were chosen because you're so capable, because you write songs that are hit songs, and you will get the opportunity to record some of your material, and you were brought in to sing leads, okay? But things happen the way they happen. And that was kind of here's how we draw you in.
So that was the draw. That was to get you to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And by this time, this is 1976.
Yes.
Diana Ross had been gone from the group for 6 years.
That's correct.
By this point, was a superstar. Motown's
No
focus was on movies at this point.
Yes.
Lady Sings the Blues has happened. Mahogany has happened.
That's right.
They have taken their eyes off of pushing singing groups, unless you
Yes,
were
they
Stevie
have.
Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Smokey
right.
Robinson,
That's
who
right.
wrote and produced their own material.
That's
you were
correct.
largely ignored.
Mm-hmm.
So by this point, Motown had almost completely stopped promoting the Supremes.
That's correct. They were still working in fabulous places.
Mhm.
You know, we were on the road 11 months that first year.
Mm.
It was a lot.
Without a hit.
Without a hit. But we recorded. We'd go in town and record, and we recorded a High Energy album. And High Energy was my only song on that. Now, I was told, you hear stuff and you know people.
Mm-hmm.
I was told that, they were very inspired, let's put it that way, the powers that be, by that, and they thought it could be a hit. And it did become a number one dance hit. And the odd thing about High Energy, it has a hook. It's mostly a hook.
Right.
And it has a few little offside things. But just recently, I think it was August of this year, the Guardian newspaper, which is the most prestigious newspaper in the UK, wrote an article about the 20 best songs that the Supremes ever recorded.
High Energy was one, and
Yes,
so was
it
Let
was.
Yourself Go from that era.
That's correct. Now, I know for a fact that we had tremendous impact
Right.
on the industry because Cashbox magazine, there was only Billboard and Cashbox
Sure.
that made any noise.
Sure.
Cashbox deemed this group of Supremes as the most musical ever.
Mhm.
And that our group was the group deemed to be the most promising.
That album
Mhm.
behind you,
Mhm.
Mary Sherry Susaye,
Yes.
I think as a whole unit, that is the best album in the Supremes' entire catalog.
I think a lot of people think that, because in the old days, they recorded a lot of fillers.
Yes,
Not only that, though.
I went back and I listened to some of those, the 60s Supremes albums, and I
Yes.
realized that because Motown owned its own publishing, they would have artists cover songs that they already
Exactly.
owned the publishing for so
Same
they could get the
track,
money. Yeah.
Same tracks, too.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you had to pay
Mm-hmm.
for those tracks.
So the single sold the album, but that was really another way of the company making more money
That's
off the
right.
publishing.
Plus, and I can understand, Barry was a genius
Mm-hmm.
at what he was doing.
For sure.
He put the right time together. And, we know it's all about timing. He put the right time together with songs and perception, glamour,
Mm-hmm.
independence. There were 3 little girls who each were different, a different look, but they melded in a very special way.
They made one complete unit.
Exactly. But the key, I believe, was, how kids, I like this one, I like this. You could be Diana, or you could be Mary, or you could be Florence. And as it went along, And when you have that I can be thing, it makes a difference in the perception that people have about a group.
Little black kids looking at
Exactly.
Ed Sullivan back at that time,
There
seeing
you go.
3 black girls who were from the projects of Detroit
Exactly.
on Ed Sullivan, which there was no TV show bigger, at least
Yes. And they could
for
relate.
music artists. Mhm.
Not just relate, but it inspired young people. We all know there could not have been a Destiny's Child if there had not been the Supremes
Right.
and a whole bunch of other groups in Vogue. I mean, whomever. There were no Black women of glamour in the music industry to that extent, who made pop music. You know, you had Lena Horne, you had Eartha Kitt, you had all of these ladies who were fabulous,
Pop
fabulous.
music that kids are at the beach with the
Dancing
radio
to.
dancing to.
There you go.
The Supremes did that.
Yes.
So
not just that, though. It was the fact that they were in these rooms that only white artists had been able to have access to before.
like Copacabana.
There you go. And they were glamorous and classy and ladylike, and yet they still could, you know, hit the beat. It was about the beat. And I remember, you know, I was in high school when we first heard about the Supremes. And the Supremes were, you know, you get this one with the big eyes and, you know, this shoulders up and, you know, the whole thing.
She's doing something you'd never seen before.
Never saw before.
You'd never seen that before.
And the others as well, they were just spot on, right? On the beat, just doing their thing and different.
It's lost on us today the value of what Las Vegas was at that time.
You're absolutely right.
They were in Las Vegas playing, I mean, the Flamingo, we look at it today as simply, that was a hotel.
Oh, I loved that hotel.
They were playing venues in Las Vegas that, unless you were Sammy Davis Jr.,
That's
black
right.
people were not in.
That's correct. And Sammy only, you know, because he was part of the Rat Pack.
With Dean Martin and Sinatra.
There you go. You know, who
Barring
could do
that,
no wrong.
Barring that, he also would not have been in those
Absolutely.
rooms.
That's right. Well, that's how he lost his eye, if you remember. He was dating my Brit, who was beautiful blonde, and they were having a ball, and somebody ran them off the road, you know, in Las Vegas. So, you know, there still was that element of, you know, stuff. But
It was okay to accept us as entertainers, but beyond that,
that's
there
right.
was no
You still
there
had
was
to
no
go in the
use.
back door,
Mhm.
you know. So the Supremes brought a different flavor to the world, and the influence of Motown all round is undeniable.
And now here you go, bringing your own flavor into this group that has brought its own flavor into the world.
Sure.
It is you, Mary Wilson, Sherry Payne.
Yes.
You embark on the world together as the Supremes.
Yes.
You were told you can produce, you can write, you can do all these things. At what point did you realize,
Not getting to do any of that.
I haven't written anything?
When I was coming down to the studio, okay? And, you know, it became very obvious. The Hollands were producing at that time. You know, they're fabulous.
Who had written
Fabulous.
all
All
the
the hits.
Supremes number ones
There
and
you
the
go.
Four Tops and Martha and the Vandellas in the 60s?
That's correct. But it was, for me, it was an older style, you know, because, see, I can't discount the fact, you know, I was in Wonderlove. And Wonderlove were young, you know, energetic, brilliant musicians, brilliant singers who had a hold on, you know, and a perception of what music in the now is and what the future's going to be, which is why Niecy, when Niecy left,
Denise Williams.
yes, when she left Wonderlove, Earth, Wind, and Fire had heard her sing and said, well, let's do this. That's how Free became her first million seller, see? So for me, it was a letdown in a lot of ways.
When you saw them in the studio, you realized, oh, they're here because they're going to write and produce,
Sure,
which means I'm not.
absolutely. But, you know, I believe that, okay, at this point, what do I do? Well, you jump on in there and you do the thing. You know, you do what you do best. And you put your whole heart into it. And High Energy had been recorded already. That album had been recorded before I got there. So when I came in the studio, there was Berry Gordy. You know, they sent a car for me, and Berry recorded me. No other Supremes were there, you know.
They dubbed your voice on Let My Heart Do the Walking, the high voice, which is a really great part of the song.
Thank you.
So that's how the high energy portion.
I sang the whole song. That's how in the, you know, one of the books collections, that's why there are other versions of it. There's my version of my singing the whole thing. And what they did when they go, you know, they go through quality control, what they did was someone, and I won't say who, I don't know who, but they sped it up. And it was like Minnie Mouse singing. So they didn't select, well, which are we going to do?
So they went with Sherry's version.
Sure. Why wouldn't they? And they took the bits and pieces, that I had done, and it kicked it up a notch.
What would you say at this point was one of, or maybe some of, the biggest challenges facing the group?
Oh,
never mind. I mean, there was also the change in music happening at the time as well.
Yes, disco was full on, and that's quite a challenge in itself. But you can think of several songs that were great songs, like Disco Inferno, that were great disco songs. I Will Survive. These songs, that's why you still hear them.
Donna Summer.
Exactly.
Anything in her catalog, you name it.
Exactly. But for the Supremes, even though, and this is weird, even though what they were singing was primarily dance music, the hits, they were dance music. But now suddenly it's disco, and that isn't fitting. It was perfectly fitting, even though the purpose that Barry had to put these girls into the position to help change and make opportunities for Black artists. That was the goal, and that meant they did the songs like in different languages and all kinds of ballads, people, different things, So I understand the vision, but at that point, it was very difficult. The most challenging thing, I think, for me was sort of thinking, can I just breathe deeply and focus on what I'm doing? Because the fans, are always upset when something changes. That is their status quo. There are factions with the Supremes that I don't know if that exists in any other group.
There's
to that
different
extent.
iterations that people like. There's different people in different iterations that people like.
Yes.
Whereas, I wonder if it's because it's a girl group, because the Temptations has had 20 plus members over the years.
I know.
Of course, they have the classic five,
Yes.
but people don't look at them. I don't think people look at them and have those different factions and divide them the way that they do the Supremes.
I know. It's a curious thing. But you see, I'm a writer. So, and I have a number one book, a book that I'm a number one best-selling international author. Hey, but called Radical Freedom. You have to.
Radical Freedom.
Radical Freedom. And it's a collective, But the thing about being a writer is you tend to think of things in very broad terms. You have an overview. And the Supremes was a situation unlike any other situation in musical history. Because, first of all, they were women. And the original three ladies who became the Supremes, and then later, Diana Ross and the Supremes. Diane had this, focus. She was going to be a star.
No matter what.
Regardless,
Didn't matter what else was going on.
That's right.
That's where her head was.
That's right. And it was going to happen. She, was blessed enough to have the brilliant verve and vivacity and, her way. You know what I'm saying?
And contrary to what I think most people believe to be true about the Diana Ross and the Supremes, Motown Berry Gordy situation, Diana Ross worked hard.
Yes, she did.
And had something different.
That's right.
And that was put in the forefront because it was so different.
Yes, I agree.
From that evolved, as we know today, whatever relationship evolved. But the core of what it was the hard work and the talent that she possessed. Yes.
Absolutely. And plus, that was about the times as well.
Sure.
She was tiny and
she
had
gave
this
Twiggy a run for
big,
her money.
She sure did. She was glamorous in a unique way, even. Mary and Florence had a different. They had a different look, but it was a good fit. They worked well together.
They did.
But the thing about Diana was that she had this magic about her, It's undeniable. And anyone who thinks differently, I'm sorry,
You're
they're
crazy.
wrong.
You're crazy.
They're wrong.
Yeah.
Which is why now, even now, and I'd say more especially because, both Mary and Florence are gone. And after they left, Cindy Birdsong came into the group. Cindy was just the sweetest person who kind of went along with whatever was the program, to her detriment to a certain extent.
I would agree with that. And I also think that for Mary also, to her detriment.
Yes.
I think once, if I were to just put myself in the headspace of I have two friends and we're singing together and we become superstars and it's like, oh, and then one gets pushed to the forefront.
Yes. So hard.
That would be very difficult. And it would make you question your own gifts and ability and talents. It would have to.
Yeah. Plus, you've got people telling you, oh, well, you're a background singer, Yeah. But see, there's so many philosophical bits and pieces around the whole thing. There was Diana, there was Mary, and there was Florence. There were two girls before even,
Betty McGlown and Barbara Martin.
Exactly. But people don't consider because they did not see them.
Right. Which is why some people are going to argue with me when I said you were the ninth Supreme.
Yes.
It's because Barbara Martin technically, officially was a Supreme under contract.
Yes.
But people have never seen her.
There you go. So it's out of their mind's eye. And then when Cindy came in, there must have been a concerted effort to find someone who was similar enough and quiet enough
to where it wasn't jarring.
Not to make waves. That's right. But they were Diana Ross and the Supremes.
And to be clear, once it became Diana Ross and the Supremes, this is the star.
This is it.
This is it.
Stand over there.
And I think by the time you get into the group, and this is now 1976,
yes,
Mary is trying her hardest to hold on to this because this was her dream.
Absolutely.
She's trying everything to hold on to it.
Now, you say that, and that's an important point because Cindy told me, I remember she called me once and she said, I just want you to understand, because she was always there for Mary. I want you to understand what it was like when Diane left. She said, the Supremes meant more to Mary Wilson than to anyone in the group. And when Mary was a trooper. I'm serious. Mary, one leg could be hanging out, but we're going to drag that leg on that stage. We're going to perform for the people. That was Mary Wilson. But she did that, and they invited Jean onto the stage in Vegas, and that was how they introduced her to the world. And it was all smiles and glamour and very little drama. But when they left the stage, Cindy said Mary collapsed because to her that was the end of her dream. And she couldn't see her way clear to move forward, that it would be a success. But oh my gosh, they had Jean Terrell there to sing Up the Ladder to the Roof.
They had
and
Jean
Floyd
Terrell
Joy
and
stuff
Stone
and
Love.
Woo! Jean could go.
That was a whole new era.
Yes.
It breathed something new.
It absolutely did. But now here's a little connective thread that's intriguing. When I was with Ray in Washington, D.C. at the Carter Barron, just an open amphitheater, a fabulous venue. The sound is impeccable. And Ray was opening for the Supremes. Jean had just come into the group. And I remember there was a bit of an upset because where Ray's dressing room was tiny, the outside, they had given him that room so they would have room. His dressing room was bigger, so they gave him that room, but his room was attached to like the greeting space, which was enormous, right? So they thought, well, okay, we traded rooms, but we could still use the greeting space, and he wasn't having it because he was a very private person and he wanted, that space. That was what he was given. So you already come in this little tight spot, right?
Let me get this open area.
Exactly. And I remember I was hurrying, I had gone to say hi and stuff, and he's in there, drinking his coffee. And I I said, Ray, I gotta go because the Supremes are
You had to go see them.
come on,
You
you
had to
know.
go see.
I want to see the Supremes. And he said, okay, head on out. And I ran up the steps. Mabel John was in the group in the Raylettes with me at that time. Little Willie John's sister. And we stood backstage and watched, and they came out. And at that time, they had trained them, to look a certain way, to stand a certain, the choreography was all built around the songs. And Jean had been told to look as much like Diana Ross as she could. So her body language was even, she held her shoulders up. I'll never forget it. But she could sing.
She could.
Woo!
She could.
They had velvet pantsuits on, with chiffon ruffles
Truly
around the
supreme.
neck. They were fabulous,
I mean, I think that there's so many allegories that could be drawn here.
Yes, absolutely.
At a certain point, management changed
Yes, it did.
for the group in the 70s. Management shifted.
Yes, it did.
And the manager, as we discussed earlier, became Mary Wilson's husband.
Yes.
There's so many allegories that could be drawn for what happens
Well,
when...
I think that was a mistake. I think it's always a mistake to have your husband as a manager, especially if it's a group, because then it's just like Beyonce's father. Beyonce's going to get the...
Naturally.
Of course. And Pedro was a very clever man, but he was not a manager. He was not in show business, So it meant, because of the situation of him being her husband
And manager.
it made difficulties at the company. And, they thought he was too bold, too pushy, or
Too
whatever.
brash.
And he was all of that. But he was, he was bold enough to do that. You know what I'm saying? You got to give him that credit. And he had a certain ethos. You don't wait for anyone. The car, you don't touch the doors. Let someone open the... I mean, he was very gentlemanly in his manner. But he was not a personal manager. No offense, Pedro, if you're out there living, But there was a certain control thing going on, that had very little to do with show business and everything to do with a relationship.
It had everything to do with what happens, I think, when you have a powerful woman.
That's right.
With a man who doesn't have his own in the same way.
There you go.
We've seen it.
Makes difficulties.
We've seen it time and time
Over
again.
and over again. We've seen it. And why are people still doing that? Because they are. They're out there. They're still doing that. But, you had this fabulous group of ladies. It's why Cindy left. It's also why I became a member of the group. Because Pedro was the one in charge, And he said, I know you're good for this group. But that also caused problems because he was giving different stories to different people. For instance, he would have you sing. He would tell me, do more, jump out there. You're on stage, push forward more. But the effect of that, you can see on YouTube and the like. It made it a bit too frantic. It made it too competitive looking. And see, competition's a heck of a thing. I'm not a competitive person. I know what I can do, and I'm like, if I'm going to do my thing. But when you have a situation, Sherry's a competitive singer, and so was Mary.
So everyone's competing on the stage for space.
Yeah, and I don't think people could see how competitive they were until I got there. And I take credit for what I do. I'm not trying to put you in a bad spot. I want us all to look good, sound good, and we had a heck of a blend and all of that. But you didn't get to hear that a lot on certain circumstances because you've got someone in the background who was, fiddling the mics and stuff. There was a lot of stuff
What do you
going
mean
on.
by that?
Well, it's like turn this mic up.
And then turn that one down.
Absolutely.
Well, I also think that some of that perhaps was learned from the old days because when it was the Supremes in the 60s, that was the case. 2 mics were turned down and 1 mic was
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And see, that's a terrible thing. Not so much, that's your business. If that's
You
how
think
you
that
want to
breeds the
rule.
competition?
Said,
You think that breeds competition?
well, pushing one forward breeds competition. That's the problem. That was the problem with Diana and the other ladies. So that filtered down. But this is the part that no one talks about. And I'm working on a book about the Supremes, but it's a different perspective. It's about the Supremes in the digital age. How would things be different? And we know they'd be much different.
Well, I think a lot of what happened wouldn't be able to today.
That's right.
I think that
Because everything's out there.
everything's out there. And I think, and actually I've thought about this too, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
If we had a situation like the Supremes today, when Florence Ballard, back at that time, what was said was she's leaving.
Yes.
She was fired from the group.
Yes. And that was very sad, the way that was done.
It was done, if that happened today, all she would have to do is make a video.
That's correct.
And put it on Instagram or TikTok. And it would not have gone down like that.
That's correct. But they didn't have that. And the circumstances were sad of what was going on behind the scenes, So it put her at a terrible disadvantage.
And she was really suffering, which at the time, we didn't have the same respect for mental health at that time that we do today.
Absolutely correct.
They didn't know how to handle that.
I know. It was still the taboo. You didn't speak in nice circumstances about certain things.
And you kept your business at home. You didn't talk about it in the street. It was just a very, very different time.
It was. But it was terrible the way that they did her. I would say it, And remember, they were very young girls. They were very young. They were in their early 20s still.
I think people forget that Florence Ballard died at 32.
Yes.
That's young.
Yes. And I had just come in the group. Now think how I felt about that. I had just, literally, I was at Mary's house when she got the news.
That Florence had died.
Yes. And from that time, I didn't know Mary that well, but she was heartbroken.
You were at her house. The phone call comes in.
Yes. And Mary went into her room. She had a long hall. She lived in the Hollywood Hills, a very glamorous place. And she had a long hall that was mirrored, floor to ceiling, and on the ceiling as well. So it was, optical illusion. But when she went in, she was a different person. When she came out, she was shattered. She was absolutely shattered.
Because there was a part of her dream also that died.
They were kids together, But she left and went to Detroit, the next day or so.
For the funeral.
Yes.
So you're fresh in the group and this happens. Fresh in the group. In Mary's book, she describes it was you, her, and Sherry and Hazel at her house rehearsing or trying on gowns.
Yes.
Fresh in the group, and this is what happens.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was absolutely crazy. And I had my own thoughts, of course. But what do you say? You try to comfort someone that you don't really know. And see, it was an awkward situation in the first place. Because Sherry and Cindy were very dear friends. And that made it awkward when I came in the group. Because Sherry, who was a gracious, gracious lady, still had to accept the fact that Cindy was gone. Nobody said anything. There was no real announcement. They didn't do that well, But
she was just gone.
She was just gone.
And now here's Susaye.
There you go.
Hi, new group member.
I know. And I remember our first gig was at the Royal Hawaiian. We went to New York City and moved into the fabulous hotel. And we went to rehearse every day with Jeffrey Holder and the Uncola Man. It was fabulous. He took us all around the city. We're all piled in a limo, and we'd stop. We must have stopped 20 times at different places. And when we got, to this very famous club, it was a restaurant club, and he said, "Now we're going straight through." and we'll be right back out. We're not staying. So there we are. Jeffrey, who's like 7 feet tall, and the Supremes, right? And we walked through, and it was like a U shape, So we went down one side, hello, 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 and we came right back out, right? But it was fantastic. And then we went to his home, and he made lentils for us, and showed us his lentils. Yes, his fabulous lady who cooked for him was from the islands, and she made us, beautiful dishes, and we were able to see his art. He was a great painter, and I'm a painter, so I was in heaven. I'm like, whoa, Oh, he was wonderful. He was.
I think only painters understand what it is to look at a painting and go, "Oh my God, look at these brush strokes!"
The strokes, dude. It was
does
fabulous.
something to you.
It really does, But and then we would go to a place that ballet dancers rehearse, and that's where we rehearsed. And why was Sherry not there? Oh, I think her mom was ill, and that's why there are pictures of Mary and I, and we were doing this, which was part of the choreography. And I really enjoyed working with Jeffrey. He was so ebullient, But then, after he left, we started working with George Faison. He was fabulous. And at first, I can remember words very quickly, but the choreography takes me. I have to actually see it in my head or dream it before it comes together.
Now I gotta go to sleep and dream about it.
Isn't that weird? But I've always been that way. If there were popular new dances, I'd have to dream it before I could do it, and then I could just do it. But we're rehearsing and trying to get this thing together so we can go to the Royal Hawaiian. And George would say, I'd be just a little bit behind, or a little bit ahead. He said, Miss Rust.
Miss Rust?
Miss Rust, what are you doing? It was fun, though, But such a gentleman,
Those had to be exciting times.
Absolutely.
I mean, what would you say, Susaye? You all do a European tour in 1977, early 1977. What would you say is the reason that the group ended there?
Well, that's a good question. But I know, when we first went to England and they had a huge group, there were 100, I think there were 250 journalists from around the world there. So they knew we were coming, and they knew that we were making some noise, and we did. We made a tremendous impact, and I know that because of the press, of all the press releases, because of the things that were written that chronicle, what's going on in something like the Supremes. At that point, I don't know that I can pinpoint any one thing, except that was about Pedro as well. Okay? Pedro convinced Mary that she should become a solo act. And she wasn't ready for it. These are her words. She didn't want to do that then. But he was pushing for it because he couldn't control.
The three of you.
Exactly. And that's a great shame. Now, I know, because of all people, Chuck D. I spoke to Chuck D on the phone, and he made a point of reaching out to let me know what an impact the Supremes, my Supremes, had on the community at large. And I've already told you, with what the industry insiders were saying, if it had stayed, if it had continued.
That iteration of the Supremes probably had the biggest
No doubt.
chance to
push on out again.
Oh, yeah.
But
the music you all recorded at that time was fantastic.
Yeah, it's baffling. But it was meant to be.
It was a control thing for Pedro.
There's no doubt about it.
What was your response to him not upholding his part of the bargain?
what do you say? You know, there were issues. There were all kind of behind the scene issues.
I'm sure.
You know, when you have someone who is out of their element but has a huge ego,
You can't say anything to him.
you can say what you like, but bounce, you know.
In one
It's-
ear, right out the other.
It's not going anywhere. You know, a lot of it just plunk, fell on the floor. Excuse me. But I don't know. I think if we had stayed or even continued, let's put it that way, it could have been a tremendous success. Because for one thing, sorry, I'm getting a little cloudy here. For one thing, the music was going into a different direction by that time.
It was.
And the only way that we were able to, that Motown was able to not be basically sued by us, because when Mary left, they gave us the Supremes, Sherry and I. We had a new contract.
You just had to find a third girl.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. But we chose Joyce Vincent. She was tiny. We auditioned several girls. I remember there was a girl named Karen Knox who would have been just perfect. You know, she was small, tiny, and could really sing. But something happened. I can't remember. It was just some fluke, you know. She didn't turn up or something. And Joyce was just perfect. You know, she, you know, Joyce had been part of Tony Orlando and Dawn. They had won an Emmy for their show.
She's
the only
perfect.
show that really competed against Sonny and Cher, you know, was their show. They were the first interracial group on you know,
mainstream television.
there you go.
Yes.
You know, they made quite an impact on the world. But we met with Joyce. I remember we sat down with Lee Young, who was the counsel, the head, you know, attorney, and we signed our contracts. We were ready to roll.
As the new Supremes.
Absolutely.
Less now minus Mary Wilson.
Sure. And then out of the blue, Mary asked if she could come back. So at that point, you know, we would have loved for Mary to come back. We didn't want her to leave, especially knowing that she didn't want to leave. But what happened was, we said, but we don't want to work with Pedro. It was about that. So we said, well, what do we do? You know, Mary went to Diane and said, let's go to Barry and let's pull the Supremes if I can't be in the group.
Because there's no original members now.
Yeah, but I believe at that point that that was short-sighted of Mary. She should have come back into the group and had Pedro not be the manager. That was a simple solution.
It would have been a very simple solution.
Except.
And, you know, we don't have to get into it if you don't want to. But, you know, these are Mary's words from her own
Yes,
story.
exactly.
Pedro was a very abusive man to Mary. And
yes.
that probably had a
Sure.
lot to do with why she couldn't separate that.
Absolutely.
Even
You
though it
know?
would have been the exact thing to do.
Yes. People end their relationships. You know, what can you say?
So Mary asked to come back,
Mhm.
but the decision between you and Sherry was, we don't want to work with Pedro. So Mary goes to Diana. They go to
Yes.
Barry. They pull the plug on the Supremes.
Absolutely. You know, which to me was pitiful, not just because of our circumstance, but see, they had offered Mary half the name, control of half the name, if she would leave Motown. Now remember, Linda and Jean, you know, they were having real hits, and they wanted to go. They wanted to leave Motown so that they could get, you know, somewhere.
Somewhere on another label.
Because Pedro was there as well. And, you know, Mary was afraid to go.
She was afraid to go, and probably that had been home. That was
Of course.
the Motown family, you know, up to that point.
Of course it was.
It worked out for Gladys Knight and the Pips when they left Motown
Yeah.
and they went.
And it would have worked for them. But because she didn't go, She didn't have any of the name. You know, if it had been me, I'd have fought for the name. Why not? Get a good attorney. You are the one who've had the hits. You know, it might have been a heck of a fight, but at the very
It
least,
would have been worth fighting.
They could have leased the name from Motown, but there was no effort to do that. So they separated. Jean and Linda separated from Mary, and Mary was very upset with them for years and years, you know. But things that happened, you know, happened. It was supposed to be that way. I even think, you know, at a certain point, I can remember the last time I saw Mary. We had gone to the HAL Awards, and we were sitting downstairs in the Polo Lounge, just the two of us sitting at a big table. And she started talking about Ralphie, her son, who had been killed in the car crash. But she was in such a good mood. She said she had dreamed about him, and she was considering us doing something again, she and Sherry and I. And then, you know, as things go, God's will, you know.
Mary went on home.
Absolutely, you know, and what a great loss. What a great loss, because she was just such a fabulous woman. She was. I have no doubt about that. You know, she made the very best of what she had always. She was she loved being out there. She loved being a Supreme, and she got better and better better.
She did.
And she was always a great performer, but her singing was not as strong as it became. And we were proud of her for fighting her way forward, you know. But there was a lot of infighting and that sort of thing behind the scenes between her and Sherry and Linda. You know, she didn't want them to be former ladies of the Supremes because it took jobs away. You know, because they could, you know, they did a fabulous show. And remember, they had Jean at one point.
They had Jean Terrell
in the beginning. That's right.
So you had Jean, and you had Linda, and you had Sherry in one group.
Yes.
That would have been a hard combination for a lot of people.
That's right.
To go up against.
That's right. So they were juggling for jobs, you know, all across Europe. C'est la vie. And I didn't want to be in it any longer. Sherry asked me in the beginning, you know, would you like to be in the group? Like, not. It's not the Supremes. It wasn't the Supremes to me. And when she called me, you know, I've just gone from the group not too long ago, you know. We had a fabulous time. We were selling out everywhere we went, and it was fantastic. It really was. You know, we were doing really well. And then COVID came and snatched the
put
rug.
a screeching halt on everything.
And everybody. It did. But once again, you know, meant to be.
Life goes as life goes, and you just have to go with that.
Yes, it does. But see, now, I was of the mind that we needed to sort of reboot, you know. The former ladies of the Supreme, as I said, we knew we could sell out. We were doing big venues. We were doing very successfully, globally. And we needed new music. We needed new recordings. But there was a mindset that was not in line with that.
What was that?
Well, you know, some people are comfortable with things the way that they are. Well, that's not me. And I've always done a whole bunch of stuff, you know, regardless. After I left the Supremes and I moved to England, I lived in England for 10 years. I recorded
This is through the 80s.
Children of the Ghetto, that's right, with Courtney Pine, which reintroduced jazz to the young audiences of the world, you know. And Jazzwise magazine called Children of the Ghetto one of the 100 songs that shook the world. It was a fabulous recording, and vocals, you know, of all time. And that's along with Miles Davis and all of these great, great jazz greats, you know. So I'm still slogging along. I know what I can do. I don't have issues making me not jump out there. Okay, we came back here, and I worked with them, but I was very unhappy just before I left the group, because it wasn't progressive.
You wanted to do something
I
different.
I did. Otherwise, what's the point? You know, you don't just sit around and become an oldies act. I don't believe in that. I'm the co-founder of Capital Code, which is a tech company that I have developed with Anita Vadavatha, who is a tech wizard, you know, who builds startups, tech startups across the globe. And we're doing some amazing things. We're creating opportunities for underserved communities in the digital world, you know. Fantastic things.
You always have had your hands in so many different things.
Got to do it. I'm interested in things. You know, there cannot be a bored Susaye in the world because a bored Susaye is probably a dangerous Susaye.
You know what they say? Idle hands.
That's right.
The devil's workshop.
That's right. But I have done many, many things. And I decided to do these things because they're what interests me. You know, I've been a judge for the Raw Science Film Festival for 9 years. You know, the Raw Science Film Festival is the only film festival in the world that focuses on films about science, technology, engineering, you know, all of technology,
So
all of
for
those
you,
things.
what is important is to always progress, always keep
Absolutely.
moving forward, never get stagnant.
Absolutely. So that's, you know, that's what we're doing now. Right now is the best time of my life. And it's hard, you know, very few people can say that. I know we got some problems in the world.
You know,
A few, you
little
know.
couple things going on here and there.
Yes. But we don't allow things that other people deem important to do stop us from making a good future for humanity.
And haven't we always had problems in the world? There's never been a time where there weren't problems in the
There you
world.
go.
They just look different from time to time.
Yes,
but the
they
problems
do.
are always there.
Yes, they do.
You came through, I mean, the 60s. That was its own.
Revolution.
Oh my goodness. That was its own thing.
Yes, it was.
Black people in the 60s? That,
But black people at that time, you know, say it loud.
I'm black and I'm proud.
Come on.
No
you
matter
know.
what was happening, we still found a way forward.
That's right. And that's what we must do now. You know, I moved from Twitter because I went to a site that's called Blue Sky, and 1 million people a day are signing up on Blue Sky because it's what Twitter was from the very beginning. There's a friend, Pete Shankman, is in the PR world. He's a tremendous person. He's neurodivergent, and yet he has tremendous focus on the future of marketing and PR in the world. He's the person who told me about Twitter. And Twitter was built for journalists, okay? So that it was like, you know, news on crack. It was just fast-paced. You could find out what was happening in the world and at such a quick space. And, you know, we're at this place right now where so many people are afraid, but no fear here. You know, that's where I live. Because what are you going to be afraid about? I've been blessed enough to have lived this long and
Through
to have
so much.
seen this many things happen. And there's so much going on in my life. You know, this is my second #1 international bestseller.
Congratulations.
So thank you. I'm very, very happy about that. I can lead with that because it opens up the world. Being a #1 bestseller opens doors you've never considered. I just got back from New Jersey, and I went to a mastermind. It was called a Quantum Leap, where we squeezed a year's worth of information for entrepreneurs into 3 days. Just an incredible group of people. Incredible.
You're keeping your mind sharp,
There you go.
which is important
It's very
because
important.
it atrophies otherwise.
Yes, and I have an experience with that. My dad lived to 99 years old, but because he played golf was really his main, you know, joy or obsession. He is whom I got my singing talent from. You know, he was extremely handsome, and he was, you know, a tremendous player, a tremendous golfer. But because of the times, he couldn't do the, you know, the things that he could do now because of his race. But as he gave up golf he gave up life because that's all he was interested in. I'm interested in so many things. One of my main obsessions
That's
now.
a word.
Yes, it is.
That's a word.
One of my main interests right now is the metaverse, because that is, I got involved in the NFT world because of cryptocurrency. I was an ambassador for a company called Red. That was one of the first companies in the world, an energy company, who you could pay in crypto. Okay. And, crypto has gone through its ups and downs. So have NFTs.
Correct.
I was part of a documentary called NFT Me, which was fabulous. It was the first one of its kind. And Johnny Kaplan, who is the host of Tech Talk in England, out of London, is a dear friend. And he asked me to, display my art and my music and all of that in this forum, in this documentary. And it's been a tremendous success. It's still online. Yes.
You have such wealth.
Yes, it's true.
You really do.
Yes,
I don't
it's God's blessing.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone watching this would have anticipated that you would be into the metaverse and NFTs. That is.
Why wouldn't I?
Why
it's a
wouldn't
whole
you?
New world.
It's the world we're in currently.
We have a gallery called the Meta Gallery, which is with my friend and partner, James Bakshi. James is a traditional art curator and gallerist for 30 years. Okay, he's in Palm Springs now. He lives in Palm Springs. He was in San Francisco, had the best small gallery in San Francisco for years and years. But as I say, he was a traditional gallerist. And I went to him and I said, James, have you heard about NFTs and, lines about this and this? And he said, why would I do that? But now James has an NFT agent. And he's pushing his own NFTs.
You put him on, Susaye.
Sure did.
You put him on.
But we are doing this gallery together. It's like having your own Getty Museum. And our first exhibition is going to be global because it's online, for heaven's sake. Everybody can see it. And primarily, the metaverse has found success in the gaming world. I'm developing games, which are, it's just so much fun. Everybody plays games.
Are you a gamer in your regular time?
To a certain extent.
Or are you more interested in the development
I'm
of
more
it?
interested in the development. You have to know quite a lot about it. I don't really have time so much to play games, but developing games, my emphasis is on respect and kindness, so that can subtly be introduced back into the world of people
On a subconscious
online.
level.
Absolutely, you got it.
So it's not in people's face where people are like, oh my gosh, they're pushing all this
Respect.
niceness and kindness, respect.
Kindness.
It's very subtle.
What the hell are you talking
very
about?
subtle.
But it's necessary. There are so many avenues. There needs to be a place particularly for Black people. I have a good friend he's called Blockstone, and he is a designer in the metaverse. The most forward-thinking, absolutely tremendous architect. And that's what he does. He and his company, they put together buildings and, recently things like Sotheby's, Vogue, all of these different companies have discovered, because it's a new world. It's a whole world, and it's decentralized, which means anybody can go in at the bottom.
Anyone.
It's on
And rise to the
everybody's
top.
game. Come
Yes.
on.
It's on everyone's game card.
Absolutely is. It's the next iteration of the web,
Yes. Yes.
It's Web 3. We're in Web 2 still. We're scrolling still. It's linear that way. But it's becoming this other thing. It's all in 3D. You have an avatar that is you. It's your identity, your personality. You can look how you like. You can, you're in 360. You're in
Yes.
3D. It's just fabulous. It's
Susaye,
artistic. It's
I
fun.
think one of the biggest atrocities in the world
Yes.
is that when people reach a certain age, we throw them
Yes.
away.
Absolutely.
We think that if someone is not on and happening and popping now, that they don't have
Yes.
anything worth offering.
Of course. And that's an American thing.
It's an American thing.
It is.
And you prove all of that wrong.
I defy.
You defy. You defy.
Well, I do.
The name of this show is Things I've Learned.
Mm-hmm.
Before we wrap up, Susaye, what is something you've learned?
Oh, my. I've learned, I think, that being yourself, being authentic, and I mean to the nth degree. You know, so many people enjoin the web because they can be anonymous. Therefore, they can be cruel, unkind. They can say all kinds of stuff. And everybody just spills their guts. They say everything. They got to post my food. You know, why are you interested in my food? Okay, there's good recipes.
There are some good recipes. I saw an Italian soup recipe today that I screenshot. Like, okay, I'm going to do that.
I'm having this one. I know. Huh? But see, it's an open world. I've learned that by pushing yourself, challenging yourself, who am I competing with? I'm competing with me.
And you alone.
That's correct. Because no one can do what I can do.
No. And never before.
That's it.
And not since will they ever be able to.
That's why we have DNA. We are all unique creatures beyond the pale, you know? And it's anybody's game, life at this point. So many people are leaving America because they cannot fathom the idea of things going awry in the way that they are. And it's going to get pretty bad. But look, during the 60s and the 70s, when America stood up and black people said, look, this is us, this is who we are, and we are worthy. Worthiness, or rather, the lack of self-worth is the most problem. This is what I have learned. The most problem in primarily the globe. People come because I can say things that uplift them. They find solace in that. And I thought that music was my purpose, but it's not. It's inspiration. It's helping others figure out who they are and what they really want. Because these times, and I can speak this with no trepidations, whatever, we are living in the days we were told about when we were little kids that were in the Bible. This is Revelations. All you have to do is cross-reference, and you can see what's going on and what was going on then and what's going on now. And these are those times. But I promise you, it says there will be a change in power. And that means those who were low will be taken high, and those who are high or consider themselves high will be taken low, because God deems it. And it says every knee will bend. Every knee.
Every.
I like that.
Not one or two.
That's right.
Every.
I've always lived by God's will. I know that because I haven't planned anything. And stuff continues every single day. Things continue to be offered to me in the form of opportunities, of uplifting, of financial freedom. I believe I'm a capitalist. I have no problem saying that. There's nothing wrong with having. There's nothing wrong with being able to provide opportunities for your children and your grandchildren. Those two beautiful little girls, a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they're crazy as possible. But they are a part of these times, and they can do anything. They can be the president. They can get on a rocket ship and go to Mars. They will leave Earth. And I know that's true because I know that every major entrepreneur in the world's goal right now is to live off world. That's going to happen. That's going to happen. I don't know that I'll go, you know. I like it here. There's still plenty to do, but I'm not afraid to try new things. I'm not afraid. What can I say?
Susaye Greene, thank you for coming.
Absolutely. What a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure was mine.
You have to come back because we could do this for.
Oh, yes. There's so much more. There's so much
more.
coming.
There's so much coming. There's so much more coming.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes, there is.
Thank you, Susaye.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Of course.